Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome those of you who are online and obviously those of you who are present here at the chapel. We're going to begin the funeral services of Mr. Frank Platchek. Rabbi Jeffrey Weil from Ezra Habonim, the Niles Township Jewish congregation, will be officiating. And at this time, he's going to approach his two sons to perform the ancient ceremony of Kriya, tearing of the ribbon.
Yeah, thank you, David Jacobson. The mourners perform the act of Kriya. Kriya means tearing. In the Bible, when something calamitous would happen, something sad, something shocking, our biblical forebears would rend their garments, really exposing a vulnerable heart. And so that is what you are doing today with the Kriya ribbons. And the blessing that you will recite, you can recite it after me, acknowledges God as the Dayan HaEmet, the judge of truth, which is something that we keep in mind even when our situation might have us question that notion that God is a judge of truth and that things are unfolding in a way that they should. And so this is the blessing. Please repeat after me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Dayan ha'emet. Amen. Adonai, ma Adam v'teda'ehu, ben enosh v'techashvehu. Adam lehevel dama, yamav ketzel, over, baboki yatzitz v'chalaf, le'erev yimalel v'yavesh. Tashev enosh adaka v'tomer, shuvu b'nei Adam. These are the words of the psalmist saying, Adonai, eternal God, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you would even be mindful of us? We are all of us just a breath. Our days are a passing shadow. We come and go like grass, which in the morning shoots up and is renewed, and in the evening it fades and withers. But God, you cause all of us to return unto dust, saying, Shuvu, return, B'nai Adam, return, O mortal ones. Would that we were wise, and would that we understood whither we go from here, for when we die we carry nothing with us, not our riches, not our glory. But God, you say, Shmor tam urei yashar. Mark the wholehearted, behold the upright. Those are the ones who shall find shalom, who shall find peace. And so, friends, we gather today, sadly, to remember and say goodbye to one who was wholehearted and upright, tam v'yashar. He was wildly funny, exuberant, passionately loving, Frank Platchek. Our scriptures have words for us at all the times in our lives, the times of joy and the times of sadness as well. We will read the 23rd Psalm, an appropriate reading for a day like today. It's in your handouts. I'll read it first in Hebrew, and then we'll continue in English together. Adonai ro'i lo eksar, bino desha yarbitzeni, al me menuchoti nahaleni nafshi yeshovev. Yancheni v'maglei tzedek lama an shemo. Gam ki elech v'geit salmavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha al mishantecha hema yinachamuni. Ta'aroch l'fanai shulchan neged sorai. Dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi ravaya. Ach tov v'chesed yerdefuni kol yemei chaya. V'shafti b'veit Adonai le'orach yamim. We read together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Esa inai el harim me'ain yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai osei shamayim va'aretz. I lift up mine eyes unto the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from the eternal God, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. Behold, the Shomer Yisrael, the protector of Israel, neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian and your protection at your right hand. May the sun not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. May God guard you from all harm. May God guard your soul. You're going out and coming forth now and forever. The words of the third chapter of Ecclesiastes, known in Hebrew as Kohelet, are familiar, and they too, like that blessing that we recited for the Kriya, which acknowledges God as the judge of truth, these familiar words also nudge us in the direction of accepting that things unfold in a very uncertain world in a way that they ought to. Again, a challenging idea, but that is an idea that our tradition wants us to at least strive to hold on to. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot that which is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, a time when we must refrain from our embraces, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep, a time to discard, a time to tear, a time to sow, a time for silence and a time to speak. So this is an appropriate time to speak words in memory of Frank Platchek. It's an interesting time of year. In a strange way, a suitable time of year for this moment as well, as I'll explain. Just a couple of days ago, we celebrated Rosh Chodesh Adar. Rosh Chodesh means the new month. We Jews celebrate the beginning of every new month, and the month is Adar. That is the happiest Rosh Chodesh, the happiest celebration of a new month all year. As the adage goes, Misha nichnas Chodesh Adar marbim b'simcha. Those who welcome the new month of Adar increase joy in the world. And why is Adar happy? Adar is happy because Adar is really characterized by the holiday that occurs right in the middle of Adar, which is Purim. Purim is our playful holiday. Most people don't think of our Jewish holidays as being playful. They're more playful than we realize, but Purim beats them all in terms of playfulness. For all of you, though, Adar has not been an increase of joy. At least it doesn't feel that way for sure. Your joy has not increased. It has diminished during these first days of this new month. For the beginning of Adar marked your final days with Frank, and it has been a sad loss, made all the more difficult by how suddenly things transpired over the last week or so, 2 weeks. But perhaps it is appropriate that Frank Platchek passed away right at the time of the beginning of this new month. For our celebration of Purim, as I mentioned, is all about play. It is the one day of the year when we Jews are encouraged to just go big. We joke around, we tease, we're actually permitted, in fact, commanded to be a little irreverent, outrageous. Purim is also about loyalty as well. Fierce loyalty to one's own. The book of Esther, from which Purim is derived, tells that story. It's about doing everything that you can for your own people. Purim was a good holiday for Frank Platchek, for it defines in many ways who he was. He was fun, like Purim. He was bombastic, the way we're supposed to celebrate Purim. He was wildly loving. He was fiercely loyal. So the fact that we lose him at the beginning of this month of Adar, sad as it is, makes sense. He was born to parents, Fred and Adele. They were German refugees who escaped to Shanghai, as did others, German Jews and others, and then they moved to Chicago. Frank was born shortly after they arrived here. He and his sister Judith were raised in Albany Park. Fred, the father whom Frank greatly admired, had been a custom tailor in Germany, owned a laundromat here in Chicago. Frank graduated from Roosevelt High School, went on to study education, math specifically. He taught, and also for years, even while teaching, he worked at Chernins. He didn't just sell shoes, he was an early adopter of systems, and he ran that for Chernins for a while. But while he was teaching, student teaching, there's another teacher who caught his eye. It was apparently against the rules for teachers and student teachers to date, so Frank was transferred. And this allowed the relationship between Frank and this young woman, Marcy, to really flourish. He liked her friends, he liked her taste in music, and though they were different in many ways, as you know, physically, temperament, interests as well, they loved each other fiercely, and they married. They first lived at 3450 Lakeshore Drive, and then they moved up to West Rogers Park, where they raised Terry and David. Frank was a fun and involved father. Despite having been a drill sergeant in the Army Reserves, a fact that I found to be very incongruous, knowing what I know of Frank Platchek. Despite having been a drill sergeant, he was not much of a disciplinarian as a father. He was indulgent. He doted on his sons and their interests. He did everything he could for them and with them, whether it's collecting stamps, baseball cards, playing Nintendo, which he was also an early adopter, doing that together. He helped coach David's baseball teams, helped Terry with science fair projects. He was good at building things, and he and David worked on home projects together. He was tuned in. He was tuned into both sons. And Proverbs teaches that parents should raise children or guide children in their own path, each child's own path. And Frank really did this. I'm sure your mom as well, Marcy too. Frank was an extremely, as I said, loyal person, loyal to his wife, loyal to his sons, and beyond. To be part of his orbit, the orbit of Frank Platchek, if we're revolving around him, one would have to accept his ways, his bombast, his very strong opinions, his wacky sense of humor. Accept it or don't accept it. And for most it was endearing. There was some charm in all that. And either way, it was part of the package. And Frank was unapologetic. I am who I am, he would say. He was also passionate about his teams, the Cubs, the Bears. He was passionate about his political affiliation, the Dems, about the Union, passionate about his food, yes. And when he discovered chat groups, his passionate would come out there too. I personally would not take on anyone who went by parasitic blob, but pity the fool who did, as Frank would be writing. Families and friends were extremely important to the whole family, to the Platcheks. Frank was particularly close to cousin Ed Freud and others too, and the Platcheks shared many good times with the Freuds and the Benjamins and the Carroll families. Marcy and Ida were very dear friends. Frank taught Jackie and Barbie how to drive. I believe Howard taught Terry and David how to drive as well. Easier that way. We will hear from some Carrolls later on about the Platchek's open door policy. It was a place where families would revolve in the neighborhood where you can come in and hang out. I don't have to get into the details, but you might hear something about hot dogs and live lobsters, perhaps, when they speak. Frank's sense of humor is legendary. His career reflected, I'd say, his passionate ways as well. It was not really a straight path. But it was full of creativity, ideas, perhaps a certain restlessness. Besides teaching and besides his engagement with Chernins, Frank Platchek was involved in contracting with pro builders. He had a medical diagnostic company mortgage brokerage, restaurateur. Of course, Marcy had the eBay business with which he was involved. So he was dynamic. There's a lot going on with this man. 6.5 years ago, as you know, sadly, very sadly, Marcy passed away. A grievous loss, a great sadness for all of you. Frank lost his partner of 4 decades. And yet during these last years, there has been joy. There's been joy in this family as the family has grown and been blessed by Kirsten and Melissa, of course, Kayla, Theodore, and Joseph. Of course, the pain of loss remained for Frank. And in his final days, he would say, "I see Marcy." Love is, as your tradition says, love is stronger than death. And the love they shared endures. And the love that you, all of you, have for the two of them also endures. Frank Platchek was a big man, big in his passions, big in his love, and this is a big loss. Our sages said, "Let there be mourning at the time of mourning, let there be rejoicing at the time of rejoicing." And so you mourn, yes, and that is, of course, appropriate. But may the memory of Frank Platchek, everything that he was, everything that he stood for, his humor, his personality, everything, may that also bring you to a point of rejoicing. May it always make you smile. May his greatness and all that word greatness implies help you be exactly who you are, as he was exactly who and what he was. May his fierce dedication to and boundless love for all of you inspire you to be dedicated and as loving to each other. And Zichrono Livracha, may his memory always be for blessing. Amen. Terry?
Thank you all for being here and for joining virtually as we put my dad to rest. Last night I was thinking about what to say about my dad. How can you do justice to someone's life in a short speech? Although Rabbi did a fantastic job. I came to the conclusion that I can't. I am, as many people know, normally a talker, but it's like it was with my mom. Something that was so natural to me, which, talking and talking some more. It's elusive. I actually had to write something down. I haven't written down a speech since I was, I don't know, probably running for the Young Democrats. Howard. I guess that kind of speaks to how I feel. Sort of like I'm not comfortable anymore in my own skin. I know my dad and I didn't always see eye to eye. He drove me nuts a lot of the time. But today, I feel kind of like the lights went out. Sorry. I've always felt like I had a path. It was bright. And it kind of feels cold and dark. And, you feel like that won't end. But I guess that's the way it is when you lose your parents. Excuse me. This, by the way, is why I didn't do this for my mom. At least with my dad, I fought enough that I thought I could remember some of the annoying times and regain my composure. And I kept reflecting last night that perhaps how I feel right now is kind of a blessing. It's a feeling that comes from 40 years of having loving parents. So the hours went on, and they ticked on, and David was looking at baseball cards, and I was taking out garbage, because that's what I do. And I thought, well, perhaps instead of a long speech, I would try and write a short one and try and figure out a word that would describe my dad. So I'd just come up with one word. And of course, then the other part of my personality came forward. I've never been able to say anything in one word in my life. It usually takes me a sentence or 6 just to start to get ready to make a point. But I think with the help of many people in this room, I've come close. And as Rabbi Weil described, my dad was a character. I think that's a good word for him, with a big heart. And the same man who would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it, or took such great pleasure in driving someone somewhere, or making them chocolate, or building something for them, or giving them a gift. He's the same guy that would scream at the television protesting whatever crazy thing he was watching, or Amy reminded me, driving Amy home to Naperville and playing Mambo No. 5 until I couldn't take it anymore because he knew I didn't like the song. He was a character with a big heart. I remember some of my first near all-nighters when I was 9. What was I thinking? I made a volcano for a science fair project, as everyone does, and I didn't like it, and so I had a fit, and I threw it away. Then I realized I didn't have a science fair project, and so my dad sat there for, I don't know, it was 2 hours. I didn't like it, of course, because the paint was running. I'm no artist. So my dad taught me about fresco. I had no idea how he knew what fresco was, but we mixed the paint in with the plaster, and he got out some chicken wire, and we made a volcano. This one that actually worked. The science part was acid-base reactions of baking soda. I was 9. I thought that was cool. The volcano was bigger than me. In the end, I couldn't carry it. And several people had to come and help my dad move the thing in. I mean, it must have weighed 100 pounds. Of course, my dad had that much plaster sitting in the basement. I have no idea why, but he did. Yet this same guy drove me nuts, refused to finish the baseboards in the house after he did 95% of a home renovation, and it's still, he redid the thing and it's still like that. It just drove me insane. But my dad was who he was. He was unconditionally loving, but he did things on his own terms. He passed away at home, as he wanted, surrounded by his family. And he expressed his love and complained that the food tasted absolutely terrible. And he was a character with a big heart. I'm going to miss him very dearly. Thank
you. Now? Okay, so Ed Freud is available to speak to us on the screen. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Well, I did prepare a short video with Joan last night, and I didn't bring my notes, but I can tell you that I had similar feelings to Terry, of course. I wanted to say that absolutely my cousin was a warm, loving, and generous man. I'd actually known him for 70 years longer than any other person on earth. He had his trials and tribulations, but he was always a pleasure to be around. You would never know that he had any troubles when you met with him. Terry's story concerning the volcano is appropriate because it's reinforced to me that when all is said and done, it's the little things that matter. For my son Brandon, who was at the funeral, it was the Bears games that Frank gave him. For Joan, it was the Madonna tickets. For me, it was after I passed the bar exam and Frank came over and gave me my first case, which was a 24-pack of beer. Frank had a good, sarcastic sense of humor, and he was a pleasure to be around. But more importantly for me, Frank and I could reminisce like no one else I could reminisce with. He understood where I came from, and I understood where he came from. We were both from a very small family. His father, I think, was an only child. His mother had one brother who was my father, and my mother was an only child. On cold days like this, I laughingly criticize the Platcheks for having moved to Chicago before we did because they were here that my parents moved to Chicago, and Frank and his family determined a large part of my life. I will always miss him, and I hope that he has an eternal rest that is comparable to his life on earth, which was all good. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, cousin Ed. Representing perspectives of the Carroll family, first Jackie Carroll.
Frank Platchek was an all caps type of guy. Whether he was screaming at a ref on TV, posting about Trump on Facebook, or just laughing, Frank was doing it at full volume. Frank was like a second father to me. I think I was 6 or 7 when I first met Marcy and Frank. My younger sister, Barbie, was in preschool, first with Terry and then with David at the JCC. And my mom and Marcy would carpool together. And since we lived less than a block apart, Marcy and my mom became best friends. And I practically grew up at the Platchek house, whose door was always open. For as quiet and tiny and contained as Marcy was, Frank was as loud and big and bombastic. They were the perfect odd couple who love each other so much. We spent most of our holidays together, and I still remember New Year's Eve after New Year's Eve after New Year's Eve, where Frank would take the live lobsters and chase after me with them, like just terrorizing me with them, probably one of the reasons I became a vegetarian, but he just loved it, and that was just so very Frank. He would take our beloved dog Romeo, this is something the rabbi mentioned earlier, and he would open up the microwave door, and he put Romeo and pretend to put Romeo in it and say something silly like hot dog, or how do you like your hot dogs? It changed each time, but it was the same joke over and over again, every single time we brought Romeo to the house. His behavior was outrageous, but then you would see the twinkle in his eye and his face start to smile, and then that full-throated laugh. And then you couldn't help but laugh. No matter how mad you were at him, like 10 seconds before, you were laughing out loud with him. He just was, his laughter was contagious. At least for me, and I think for most people here. And as Rabbi said, Frank taught my sister and I how to, maybe it was Terry, but Frank taught my sister how to drive because we were his little girls. He used to call me Jackie Poo, and I called him Frankie Poo, which was super silly, but that was also Frank. He was silly, lovable, loyal, caring, and always there for us. Part of his bright light dimmed when Marcy died. He would still do and say crazy things, but with a little bit less gusto. His resident eye roller was gone. I spoke to him last week after the diagnosis, and he was still Frank. And he said to me, "I see Marcy." And I was lucky I got to say, my sister and I got to say goodbye to him this weekend. But today my heart is broken for me and for all of you. I am so sorry, because for those of us that were in Frank's orbit, all of our hearts are broken. I will miss his love and his laughter and his all caps attitude. But I truly believe that he's in heaven with Marcy and he's telling her some outrageous joke and she's rolling her eyes and secretly smiling.
Thank you, Jackie. Barbie?
So I'm going to be super quick. I think, as everybody knows, I did not prepare anything because I didn't even plan on coming in. As everybody here knows, I'm a little bit COVID crazy, a little bit extreme, but I couldn't not be here to say goodbye. As Jackie already fully encapsulated how we feel, Frank was our dad, and Marcy was our mom, and we spent our entire childhood there around their table and with them, and so many wonderful memories. Now, she was Jackie Poo and Frankie Poo, and I was Barbara, and he was Frankala. So every time I called, Frankala, and he'd be like, "Oh, Barbara." He always had the same jokes. With me, it was the haircut. "Did you get your hair cut?" "No, I got them all cut." So when I remember when you said about your volcano, I remember that volcano. I remember when you threw that away. But your dad spent all that time. We redid all the stuff. Remember when we did the wallpaper with the baseball cards and signed the names and everything? So we all have so many wonderful memories. But one of my favorite memories, I don't even know if we talked about this recently, but I was 16, a junior in high school. And I had my best friend who lived literally one block on Mozart. And we were always together. But one day I took the day off of school. And my mom, who never, ever, ever said this, said, "If you take the day off school today, you are not going out with your friends." "Okay, Mom, no problem, whatever." I didn't care, fine. Then my friend Christina called and she said, "Hey, why don't you sneak out and come over?" And I had never done that. It was freezing cold like a day like today, snowing, and there was ice on the windshield. I couldn't see anything. So I drive over there, and it's middle of the night, and I have the windows down so I can drive and see because there's snow on the windshield, and I can't see. So I decided to leave the car running because, we always had that extra set of keys. Leave the car running, lock the door in the alley, and let the car warm up while I went into my friend's house. Then I was going to, go back. All of a sudden, I walk up there, and I realize I locked my keys in the car. And I didn't have the spare set. And I start like hyperventilating. So we call locksmith, all this stuff. And finally, who did I call? Because I was not going to call my parents. Frank. And who at 2 a.m. came walking over with a hanger in his hand and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth with Terry. You're like, oh, Barbara, what did you get yourself into now? Well, of course, there with the hanger, he pulled up the lock, unlocked the car, and said, and now you have to tell your parents. And I was like, no, the whole point of calling you was to avoid that. And he's like, oh, no, I am not going to suffer the wrath of Ida. I was like, Ida, you mean Howard? He's like, no, Ida. I'm not suffering that wrath, and you're going to tell them. And that was Frank. Frank always was there for you. 2 a.m. in the morning to break into my car at 16 years old. And yep, he did it. And of course, I don't even remember. I'm sure I told my mom. And I'm sure he told you several times, but we used to laugh about the fact, even just a few years ago, we laughed about, I think it was New Year's Eve, about the fact he was not going to suffer the wrath of my mom. But he was always there for me, and he was always there for anybody. And yes, he always loved how gullible my mom was, and he loved how gullible I was, although my mom was more gullible. And so it just made for so many laughs, the big belly laugh that Jackie talked about. And the one last memory that I will always, always remember was the last New Year's Eve that we went out. And we went to your house, as Jackie said. Most years we did New Year's Eve. We did the lobster. And so 2 years ago, we did New Year's Eve, and you guys brought out Cards Against Humanity. And that was one of the best nights. He laughed so hard. We have so many videos of him just being so silly that it was such a wonderful time. And this was at a time after Marcy had already passed. So that light that Jackie talked about, things had already changed. And you brought back that full belly laugh and happiness like I had never seen. And having you guys living at the house and having Joseph with him was something that always lit him up. He loved playing with Joseph. He loved playing with Theodore. He loved his grandchildren. He loved his children. He loved you. And he loved you. He was always so proud of both of his sons. And he would do anything for both of you. So I know that all of our hearts are broken. But you guys, you know how lucky you are. Because you had the most wonderful parents who loved you and are so proud of everything that you do. So I love you all.
Thank you all. Ledahi Reshit Uftirat Tachlit Hachaim Kamasahem Kahalicha Smicha Mishalav L'Shalav. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life a journey, a going and a growing from stage to stage. And the journey of Frank Platchek has now come to its sad conclusion. Oh God, we see life as through windows that open upon eternity. We see that love does endure and that the soul does endure, as you, O God, endure. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, that they're more than flowers that fade, but rather they weave a timeless pattern in a world that is the dwelling place, O God, of your love and your glory. We now rise for the memorial prayer, El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kedoshim Utehorim, Kezoha Harakim Asirim, Et Nishmat Yosef Ben Yaakov, Shalach La'olamo. Ba'al Harachamim Yasti Rehu Beseter Kenafahav La'olamim, V'yitzvor B'tor HaChaim Et Nishmato. Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'yanuach B'shalom Al Mishkavo, v'nomar. Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence with the holy and the pure who shine like the glow of your heavens to Frank Platchek, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence and within the shadow of your wings. Let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And we say, Amen. You may be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment service will continue at Sunset Memorial Lawns. For those of you who are driving in the procession will be forming in the front of our building. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield and have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing a car in the back of the procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. And for your own safety, use your horn liberally as you're going through the intersections. Memorial contributions in his memory to the JCFS Chicago or the Stanford Children's Health. That information is on the service folder that you received upon entering the chapel. And for those of you who are online, you can find that information on the Chicago Jewish Funerals website, and you can also leave condolences to the family there as well. At this time, I invite everyone to please rise and stand in place as we escort the casket of Mr. Frank Platchek from the chapel. Then you may return to your cars, and this concludes the online portion of the funeral service. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to the cemetery, just be in the front part of the parking lot, okay?